Let's talk about that with Baz Ramaiah. He's a former teacher. He's also the head of policy at the Centre for Education and Youth. Good morning to you, Baz.
Morning, Julia.
Thanks for joining us. There's a report out today showing, it's for the Education Select Committee of MPs, basically saying they've got persistent absences since lockdown. It's got worse, not better in recent years, and a huge number of children just aren't in school at all. And there's a big question about whether or not there should be, fines for parents. I mean, it depends why the kids are out of school, doesn't it?
Absolutely, Julian. I think when we look at the evidence on fines, it's a very tempting thing to go for. We want to punish parents for not getting their children to school, but the evidence shows that fines are not effective for two reasons. Either you're a family living in poverty. We know poverty is one of the main drivers of this current crisis and young people being persistently absent. If you're a family in poverty, then being fined doesn't help you overcome the barriers that are in your way from getting your child to school.
What are the barriers of getting your child to school because you're poor? Because I know plenty of people who grew up in poor homes and their kids all went to school. Kids in Africa living in mud huts get to go to school.
Well, you're absolutely right, Julia, that lots of families who are in poverty are working incredibly hard and managing to get this right. But there are a small percentage of families who are not able to do that and do.
What do you mean not able? You mean these are failing parents? They're on drugs. They're recovering from last night's alcohol binge. They just don't care. They're not bothered. They're not organised. Let's not say it's because of poverty. It's because
I think when we look at the evidence, when we look at experts who are working on this, whether they're in the charitable sector or whether they're schools, when they talk about how the cost of living crisis is affecting families, we're talking about families who aren't able to afford bus fare to get their child to school. We're talking about families who live in communities where their local bus routes have been removed and therefore their child finds it difficult to access school physically. We're talking about families who won't have been able to afford the rent in their area and have therefore been forced to move much further.
Okay, those are specific. Absolutely. Those are genuine barriers. I completely accept that. What do you make, though, of the failure of sort of get kids back to school since lockdown? The report out today basically saying, the decision to get kids out of school, to lock them in their homes, was caused totally predictable damage, huge damage, and was preventable.
It's absolutely correct that COVID did make young people's mental health worse. And we do think from the evidence that young people's mental health, but also parents' mental health, is a big driver of this issue of persistent absence at present. But moving beyond lockdowns, the issue here is that the government has failed to invest for a very long time, Julia, in children's mental health services. And that means that when young people aren't well, they're not able to get the treatment and support that they need. We're in a position presently where by the age of 16, 50%, half of 16-year-old girls have been referred to mental health services and they've not been able to get the support that they need.
Absolutely.
So if we really want to overcome this problem in the long term, we need to be looking at the government investing and getting those mental health.
Might have been a good idea not to cause a lot of those problems in the first place as well. Baz Ramaiah, thank you so much for joining us, final guest at today's show.